Hey, vinyl community. Jeff here again. Of course, it's me. Time to do another one of my countdown 10 great albums in my collection, and I believe we are up to 1979. Now, as I mentioned in my early one, I've seen a lot of people do rankings by various years. I've been kind of following along with Ron over at his channel. He started in the earlier years, and he's going backwards. He's like at 81 now. And it just makes me realize as I head into the 80s, now it's been kind of scarce with the 70s because I have some stuff in my collection from the 70s, but I would have to admit that my current vinyl collection is definitely 80s heavy. So when I get into the 80s, there's going to be a lot more to choose from because, as I mentioned in the first video and whatever, I'm only sticking to the vinyl releases that I have. I'm picking 10 of the great albums that I own on vinyl. There's a lot of great albums I don't own yet. So these are very limited to what I have after just a couple years of collecting. And so as I get into the 80s, though, I know that I've got a lot more in my collection from the 80s. And there's probably a lot of gaps in there that I don't have. Albums that I think are probably top notch. Be number one, number two, who knows, for that year, but I may not own. So anyway, it's easier this way in some ways to limit myself because otherwise, I dig through my CDs and stuff. I don't want to do that. This is strictly what I own on vinyl, 10 of the greatest albums that I own currently, in my opinion, and are somewhat ranked. So let's get right into this. 1979, very first Accept album. Have to say, I love Accept, and so they did make the cut here, but this is not, this is a totally different Accept to what you probably get used to once they got into Breaker and later. They really found their style, I think, at that point, and it just was uphill amazingness from Breaker on. First two albums kind of, were just a band, a young band finding their way, and it's great to have, great to hear, and but again, if I were to rank the Accept albums, this one would probably, who knows, be at the bottom of that list just like it's at the bottom of this list. I don't know. Triumph, Just a Game. Triumph is a band that I heard the hits back in the 80s, heard the hits back in the day, never really bought into it, never bought into them. They were always a little more on the commercial side. But now in later life and now buying and getting back into buying vinyl records and finding their stuff and buying their stuff, newfound love, newfound appreciation for all things Triumph. To me, they had two albums out. Just a Game came out, and again, I'm visiting this stuff decades later. I don't know how it was back in the day when these were coming out. This is where I feel like the band has really come to its own, and this is where I'm finding, this is the beginning of the greatness. The first two albums, had some, were good rocking stuff, but Lay It on the Line is a big hit off of this. When you get to this era, I just feel like this is the Triumph sound that we're starting to really see for the next few albums of their career. So of course I don't have their first two albums. I just have that one compilation I showed, which is a pieces of the first two albums. So I may be missing something there that I didn't have. Angel, Sinful, they've been on the list before. Angel, again, this was just one of those bands that was, they were pretty hot back in the day, and they were trying to be marketed as like another Kiss with all the special effects and the costumes. In this case, just a lot of white. Anyway, they were on the same label and all that stuff. So yeah, appreciate their stuff. Again, I was not into them back in the 70s when they were around. I heard about them, always read about them in Circus magazine and magazines of the day. But by the time I really got into the stuff in the earlier 80s, they were kind of gone and not really much in the scene. It was really older issues that I saw. But of course, years later, I got into them and bought all their CDs, and then later I picked up all of their vinyl and really appreciate them. So Angel falls in there at number 10, 9, 8. Number 7, Blackfoot Strikes. Okay, so just like bands like Triumph, Blackfoot had two albums out prior to this. They had a couple years in between, and then they came out with Strikes. Now, to me, this one is iconic. This is the album that all through the 80s, I always saw this up. This was the cover is just, it's plain, but it's powerful. And this album, to me, even before I ever listened to it, back in the 70s and 80s, saw it all the time, thought it looked really cool, had no clue anything about them. Later, I think I got into Blackfoot much later, but you knew the hits from this. But to me, this is where the band really, again, came into their own, kind of had their sound. Their first two albums were, good, but this album is where it just, to me, went to the next level, and it just went up and up and up from there. I mean, I've Got a Line on You, great hit. It's more or less a cover. It's not a Blackfoot original. Had been done previously. It's hard to do because a lot of these songs, are really big to me. But Wishing Well, Train, Highway Song. Our band still plays Highway Song to this day. We've talked about doing Train, but to me, this is where the band just solidified, and it went uphill from here. Great stuff. All right, Judas Priest, Unleashed in the East. This is a very pivotal live album for Judas Priest. Now, all the albums prior to this, great albums, but when you hear those songs on this live album, they became just next level. So you've got a lot of the songs that, their earlier albums, I admit, they were good, but they, lacked a little energy of later years. And anyway, you get to this album. I remember back in the day, in the 80s even, people talked about this being just one of their favorite Judas Priest albums. It's a live album. But again, all of the songs that they do from previous albums, new life here. And it's just one of the most powerful representations of a lot of these old songs. And so, excellent. And this is one of those albums that I got as a stiffener with another album I ordered. I'm surprised the guy sent this as a stiffener, and it was in, the cover's a little rough, but the album itself was in very good plus, if not better, condition. Judas Priest, gotta love them. In at number 5, Love Drive by the Scorpions. Now, I admit, back in the day, I got into Scorpions in Blackout. That was my first album, and so I discovered it, but then absolutely loved them. A lot of the earlier stuff was a little mild compared to what I was hearing on Blackout. Of course, it took years, and you eventually get to appreciate that stuff. And this has a lot of great tunes on here, but I still appreciate the Blackout in later years. Loving You Sunday Morning, Another Piece of Meat. Some of these are classics that just continue on. Holiday, just songs that, they played live, continued for a long time. So, again, to me, they had a lot of great stuff prior to this. You had the Uli Roth years and all that. And then this is when they start changing different sound and everything. And so this is the early days of that great sound. Had to have some Sammy Hagar in here. Street Machine. Now, I discovered Sammy Hagar. Back in the days in the 70s, I was seeing this and the album that followed all the time. To me, because they just have him on the front. The other one's got him on the front. Danger Zone has him on the front with the guitar. To me, very iconic covers, mainly because their simplicity just looks really cool, in my opinion. They're very red, of course. And I saw them all the time. They were always in the record bins back in the 70s and 80s. And so it took a couple years before I finally got into them, because I really got into him around 3 Lock Box, which would have been in the 80s. Those are the Geffen years. These are the Capitol years. Eventually, I started buying the Capitol releases a little later in the 80s, earlier 80s, but still in the 80s. Absolutely fell in love with them. Still to this day, this is one of my favorite Capitol releases. This and Danger Zone, which it would definitely make the mix for the next year. On here we've got, see, to me these are all classics, but you're probably like, I don't know those songs. But anyway, Trans Am, I'm trying to pick the ones that maybe you've heard on a live album, if you picked up on any of the live albums like that. Plain Jane, this Planets on Fire, Burning Hell. Planets on Fire, Burning Hell. This is the album where that song came from. And if you're got the new Megadeth album and you got the bonus tracks, they do a cover tune with Sammy singing with them of that song. Absolutely classic. This Planets on Fire, Burning Hell. Anyway, Falling in Love, straight to the top. Just, to me, if I go to grab a Sammy album, I'm going for something like this. Now we're at number 3. So, moving forward in the ranking, Adam and the Ants, Dirk Wears White Socks. The first Adam and the Ants album, 1979. To me, it is just primo. It's classic. It's like UK punk, but it's kind of pop. It's not really as punky. It's just kind of odd. It's not like, thrashy type punk of the Dead Kennedys or, bands like that. But anyway, it is just one of my, still to this day, one of my favorite albums. When I go to grab an Adam and the Ant album to go grab for listening, I gravitate towards this. Well, actually, the Adam and the Ants years, I gravitate to that a little more, but this one in particular has always had a high place, and so it ranks up there at number 3. Moving in to number 2, 1979. This is Dynasty. Yes, I'm a huge Kiss fan. This was the first Kiss concert I went to. This was the first concert I ever went to as a kid. Again, I got into Kiss first, 78, 77, 78-ish era, so this was early. I didn't do a lot of care about, they changed sound or whatever. Kiss was Kiss. They had the fantasy, they had the makeup, they were great. I didn't complain. Loved it. Still love it. Still one of my favorite albums. They're all my favorite albums for different reasons, And yeah, it'd be hard to rank all the Kiss albums because then you got to really, fight with yourself. But I still love this album, regardless of the background, regardless of the inner fighting, regardless of all the stuff that we now know about what was going on with the band. I still listen to this album, still love this album. It is on the list at number 2. Number 1, similar to the last list, is Van Halen 2. Now, I will admit, in the day, I discovered Van Halen probably Fair Warning era, Women and Children first, maybe. I can't remember which one came first as far as my knowledge or purchase. Obviously, everybody knew the hits from number 1, but to me, this was always kind of like, what they say, the redheaded stepchild. This album always kind of paled in comparison between 1 and 3 and 4. The second album was just kind of like, it's got a cover song. It's got, it's like, oh, you're no good. For the longest time, I just thought this was kind of an icky album. It wasn't, it wasn't as great as number 1. And then I thought, Women and Children First, Fair Warning were so much better. Over the years, this album has grown to be up there with the rest of them. It makes number 1 today. It is just, it's got such great songs. I mean, if I were to rank the David Lee Roth years, this album might go down further, but I'm not even sure anymore. It'd be really hard pressed to rank them and see where this would fit in. But back in the day, when I only had, say I only had all the David Lee Roth albums, or even up to Diver Down before 1984, this probably would have been closer to the end of my list. So, but not anymore. It's a great album. It makes the top of the list for 1979 as one of probably the best album I have on vinyl in my collection right now from 1979. I'll be back. Thanks a lot for watching. Rock on and rock hard.